It was a busy Friday evening at one of the city's most popular high-end restaurants. The place was alive with chatter, clinking glasses, and the subtle aroma of carefully prepared meals. Waitresses moved quickly between tables, balancing trays and offering polite smiles to customers who had come to celebrate the end of a long week. Among them was a young woman who had been working there for a few years. She was used to handling the rush, but there was something about tonight that made her feel alert, almost like she could sense a story unfolding before it even began. Her eyes scanned the room as she carried a tray filled with plates of sizzling food. That was when she noticed him. At a corner table near the back, sitting slightly apart from the rest of the crowd, was a man who immediately drew attention without trying. There was a calm confidence about him, a way he sat back in his chair that suggested he was used to being in control. Yet, there was also an air of caution. He glanced around the room occasionally, as if making sure no one was paying too much attention. She had seen important people before, celebrities and politicians, but there was something different about this man. He seemed powerful, but he was trying very hard not to appear that way. As she approached his table to take the drink order, she felt a small thrill of curiosity. He greeted her politely, his voice measured and calm. He asked for a specific type of wine, and she noticed the care with which he described it. There was no arrogance, just precision and attention to detail. She jotted down his order, but she could not help noticing the subtle gestures of his companions. They were clearly colleagues or associates, and their conversation was low and careful, as if discussing matters that should not leave the table. After taking the order, she walked away, but her mind kept returning to that table. Something about the way he spoke and moved seemed unusual. Most people at a place like this came to relax, laugh, and enjoy the atmosphere. But this man and his group were different. They were cautious, almost tense, and that drew her in. She wondered what kind of person could command such presence, yet try so hard to remain unnoticed. She told herself to focus on her work, but curiosity was difficult to suppress. Throughout the evening, she continued to serve other tables. But she found herself glancing back at that corner table when she had a chance. She noticed small details that seemed out of place. One of the men kept checking his phone with an intensity that went beyond normal business calls. Papers were shuffled discreetly between plates, and the man himself occasionally leaned back, watching the restaurant as if expecting something. It was all very subtle, but to her trained eye, it was intriguing. She had learned over the years that people often revealed more than they intended through small actions. And tonight, she felt like she was witnessing something important. The restaurant grew busier as the night went on. Music played softly in the background, but the murmur of conversation and occasional laughter created a constant hum. She moved from table to table, her tray always balanced, her smile always ready. And yet the cornered table never left her thoughts. She wondered about the man's life, about the kind of world he operated in. It was not just his presence, but the way he carried himself. There was a certain secrecy, a carefulness that hinted at responsibility and perhaps even pressure. She had served many people over the years, but she had never encountered someone who seemed so aware of being observed, yet determined to stay private at one point. She had to refill water glasses for a nearby table. As she bent down, she overheard a fragment of the conversation from the corner table. The words were quick and muffled, but she caught something about a deal, something about timing, and a reference to an event that seemed sensitive. She froze for a moment, unsure if she should pay attention. But human nature and curiosity are hard to fight, especially for someone who had always been observant. She straightened up, pretending to adjust a chair, and let her ears catch more without being obvious. She realized she was piecing together small clues that could hint at something much bigger. The young waitress knew the importance of discretion in her job. She had learned to read people without drawing attention to herself, and tonight that skill seemed particularly useful. She took mental notes of details, the way the CEO's hand tapped against his glass, the brief glance exchanged between him and one of his associates, the way a folded document was carefully hidden from view when a server approached. Each small act told a story, and she found herself fascinated by the puzzle before her. Meanwhile, the CEO, completely unaware of the observation, continued to navigate the evening with his usual precision. He asked for certain dishes, made polite conversation, and occasionally checked his phone. To anyone else, he might have seemed like a regular high-profile guest. To the waitress, every movement, every glance, was a piece of a larger picture. She was learning more with each passing moment, and the more she noticed, the more she realized the weight of what was being kept secret. She did not fully understand all the details, but instinct told her that this was significant. As the dinner service continued, she found moments to pause near the table under the guise of refilling drinks or clearing plates. Each time she observed, each time she noticed something new. There was a certain tension in the room, unspoken but palpable, and she could sense that the CEO was working hard to control it. The way he leaned back slightly, the careful choice of words, the discreet signals to his companions, all of it painted a picture of someone, accustomed to power but wary of exposure. At one point, she accidentally dropped a glass near the corner table. Her heart raced, worried she might have disrupted the evening. But the CEO merely looked over with mild curiosity, then returned to his conversation without a hint of irritation. It was a small interaction, but it revealed another layer of his character. He was used to disruptions, to the unpredictability of human behavior, and he managed it with calm precision. The young waitress, though nervous, felt a strange sense of connection in that moment. She was witnessing someone who was brilliant and cautious, and she could not help but admire the control he maintained throughout the night. She continued to move between tables, balancing professionalism with her growing curiosity. She served, smiled, and kept conversations polite, all while her mind quietly cataloged observations. She noticed the pattern of movements, the timing of phone calls, the way certain words were emphasized, and the subtle expressions that revealed more than the words themselves. Each small detail added to a growing understanding that there was a story behind the public image, a story that the CEO wanted to keep hidden from everyone. As the evening drew on, the restaurant began to empty. Most guests had left, leaving only a few remaining patrons. The young waitress finally allowed herself a brief moment to rest, wiping her hands on her apron and leaning slightly against the counter. Her eyes, however, kept returning to the corner table. Even in the quiet moments, she felt the tension in the air. The CEO continued to maintain his calm exterior, but she could sense the underlying urgency. Something significant was happening. She had front row access to it. She thought about the responsibility that came with what she knew, even if it was just fragments and observations. Secrets have power, and she was beginning to understand the weight of hers. For the first time in a long time, she felt like more than just a waitress serving food. She was a witness to something bigger, something that could have consequences far beyond the restaurant walls. By the time the night ended and the last guests were leaving, she had seen enough to know that the story would not stay contained for long. The CEO had tried to keep it secret, carefully navigating the evening to protect his private matters. But in doing so, he had unknowingly exposed himself to a young, observant waitress who was more perceptive than he realized. She left the restaurant that night with a sense of purpose and anticipation. Knowing that what she had seen and heard was only the beginning of something extraordinary, the first chapter of a story about power, secrecy, and courage had quietly unfolded before her eyes, and she was ready to witness it all the next morning. The young waitress arrived at the restaurant early, as she often did before the lunch crowd. The quiet hours were her favorite part of the day, when she could organize the tables, polish the cutlery, and mentally prepare for the long hours ahead. But her mind was still on the previous evening. The man at the corner table, his careful movements, and the secrets she had sensed were impossible to forget. It wasn't just curiosity that drove her, but a strange sense of responsibility. She had seen something important. She felt she needed to understand more. As she went about her morning routine, her colleagues began arriving. They chatted casually, sharing stories from their lives, but she found it difficult to focus on small talk. Her mind kept returning to the CEO. She replayed each moment in her head, the way he gestured with his hands, the documents he tried to conceal, and the fleeting expressions that revealed so much despite his careful attempts to stay composed. She realized that she had seen more than anyone else in that room, more than even the staff who had served him directly. Pieces of a puzzle were scattered before her, waiting to be connected. Her shift began, and the restaurant slowly filled with customers. As she served meals, she kept an ear open for any mention of the man, though she knew that would be unlikely. Still, her instincts were sharp. She noticed patterns, small details that other people would miss. The way someone adjusted their suit, the slight tension in a voice, the way a hand trembled ever so slightly. These were all signals of something larger beneath the surface. During a brief break, she pulled out her notebook from her apron pocket. Over the years, she had developed the habit of jotting down small observations, funny incidents, unusual behavior, and moments worth remembering. Now, her notebook became a map of clues. She wrote down details from last night, from the CEO's table, noting expressions, gestures, and phrases she overheard. Each note seemed more meaningful when she looked at it carefully, and she realized she could reconstruct much of what had happened even. If no one else remembered, her manager approached her at that moment, offering a quick smile and a reminder to pace herself during the lunch rush. She nodded, grateful for the moment of normalcy, but her attention remained divided. Her mind worked quickly, trying to connect dots. She thought about what kind of secret could be so important that a powerful man would take such extreme care to hide it. Was it personal? Professional? Or perhaps both? She did not know, but she knew it mattered. The lunch service began in earnest, and she moved between tables with practiced ease. A family celebrating a birthday, a couple sharing a quiet meal, a small group discussing business, all went about their meals, oblivious to the puzzle she had in front of her. She served them politely, but her eyes often drifted to the edges of the room. The CEO sitting in the corner once more. In her mind, she replayed the movements she had seen, the way he leaned over documents, the subtle signals to his associates, the brief but deliberate exchanges of glances. It was almost like a dance. A careful performance meant to keep everything hidden. As the hours passed, she began noticing something else. The details she had written down revealed patterns. Certain phrases had been repeated. Certain gestures had occurred at predictable moments. It was as if the CEO had an unspoken language that only someone paying close attention could understand. She realized that she had been reading that language without even knowing it. The more she reflected, the more convinced she became that what she had witnessed was important. More important than most people could even imagine. Her thoughts were interrupted when a regular customer, an older gentleman who came in almost every day, waved her over. He had always been kind and curious, often asking her opinion on small matters. Today he asked how she was doing, and she smiled, giving him the polite, friendly response she always did. But inside, her mind raced. She tried to explain the situation to him subtly, without revealing details or sounding absurd. She spoke of noticing unusual behavior, of seeing patterns in people's actions. The gentleman nodded thoughtfully, offering a few pieces of advice about observation and patience. His words encouraged her, making her feel that her instincts were valid. By the afternoon, the lunch crowd had faded, leaving the restaurant quieter. She took a moment to catch her breath and reflect on what she knew. Each detail from the previous evening seemed more significant now that she had time to think. She realized that the CEO had been more than cautious. He had been strategic. Every gesture, every word, and every glance had a purpose. He was controlling the situation, controlling perception, and controlling what could or could not be seen. And yet she had glimpsed enough to understand that even the most careful planning had cracks. And she had seen them. She also began to think about the risks. Observing powerful people was not without danger. If the wrong person noticed her attention, it could lead to trouble, or at the very least, awkwardness. But she also knew that knowledge could not simply be ignored. The fragments she had seen told a story that could not remain hidden forever. The truth had a way of surfacing, and she felt a sense of moral obligation. It was not about power or fame. It was about honesty and integrity. Later in the afternoon, another unusual event caught her attention. A delivery arrived for a VIP guest, a package that required careful handling. She saw the CEO's associates receive it and noticed the tension in their movements. Every step was deliberate, controlled, and precise. She realized that this was another piece of the puzzle, something that connected to the documents and conversations from the night before. Each observation reinforced her understanding. This was bigger than a single dinner, bigger than casual curiosity. It was a moment where secrets and reality intersected, and she was right there. Observing it all throughout the day, she kept her composure, continuing to serve customers and maintain her professional demeanor. Inside, however, her mind never rested. She thought about the CEO, his careful planning, and the layers of secrecy that surrounded him. She imagined what it would be like to sit in his shoes, to carry the weight of responsibility and the fear of exposure. And then she contrasted that with her own position, a young waitress, invisible to most of the world. Yet now, holding knowledge that few others possessed, as the evening approached, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that what she had seen could not remain hidden forever. She sensed that the moment of revelation might be closer than anyone expected. The anticipation made her heart race, but it also gave her focus. She was determined to observe carefully, to understand fully, and to act when the time was right. When the restaurant finally opened for dinner, the young waitress moved among the tables with a sense of alertness and quiet confidence. Each interaction was polite and professional, but her mind was on the larger picture. She noticed the nuances of each customer's behavior, the subtle hints of tension or relaxation, and the rhythms of conversation. All of these observations sharpened her instincts, preparing her for the moment when she might need to act. As the night progressed, she reflected on her journey. From the first glimpse of the CEO to the careful observations she had made throughout the day, she realized that she had grown more aware, more perceptive, and more confident in her own abilities. She was no longer just a waitress serving meals. She was an observer, a witness, and perhaps unknowingly, a catalyst for what was to come. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, and she was ready to see the bigger picture unfold. By the time the restaurant quieted down at the end of the night, she felt a sense of anticipation that she could not shake. The events of the previous evening and the observations of the day had created a momentum that promised something extraordinary. She knew that the CEO had tried to keep secrets, but she also knew that secrets, once seen, were difficult to maintain. The story was unfolding, and she was at the heart of it. Ready to witness the truth rise to the surface, the following evening arrived with the familiar rhythm of the restaurant, soft lighting, the hum of conversations, and the occasional clatter of dishes. The young waitress had a sense of purpose as she walked through the doors, her mind still filled with thoughts about the powerful man she had observed 2 nights earlier. There was a story unfolding around her, a story that involved careful secrets, subtle movements, and hidden truths. She felt both anticipation and responsibility, as if she were now part of a world she had never entered before. As she began her shift, she noticed a few subtle changes in the atmosphere. The restaurant staff seemed more alert, possibly sensing that something unusual had been happening. She moved between tables with her usual grace, balancing trays and taking orders, but her attention was divided. Her eyes frequently drifted toward the entrance and the corner tables, instinctively searching for familiar faces. Her mind replayed every detail she had observed, analyzing patterns, gestures, and expressions. The previous evening had been like a puzzle, and she was determined to piece it together. Not long after she started, the CEO entered the restaurant. He was alone this time, yet his presence carried the same weight as before. Even from a distance, she could sense the careful control in his posture, the precision in his steps, and the way he scanned the room. He seemed slightly more tense, as if the events of the previous evening had left him more aware of his surroundings. She noticed how he adjusted his tie and checked his phone with the same meticulous care. But this time, there was a subtle unease, a crack in the otherwise calm exterior. Her role that evening was more challenging. She had to maintain professionalism while also quietly observing. Each movement, each glance from the CEO told a story. She saw the way he spoke with the hostess, how he chose a specific table, how he positioned himself so he could observe the entire dining area. His actions were deliberate, controlled, and strategic. Yet she also detected moments where he seemed to anticipate an unseen threat or unexpected attention. These were the moments she focused on, analyzing every small gesture to understand the larger picture. As she moved from table to table, she overheard fragments of conversations around her. Patrons discussed work, family, and daily life, completely unaware of the silent story unfolding in the room. Yet for her, each ordinary detail added to the context. She noticed how people unconsciously revealed information through body language, the way their eyes moved, and the subtle tension in their voices. The contrast between the normalcy of the restaurant and the hidden intensity at the CEO's table fascinated her. It felt like watching two worlds intersect, one visible to all and one carefully concealed. At one point, she was tasked with bringing a special dish to the CEO's table. As she approached, she noticed his eyes flick briefly to the corner of the room, a subtle signal that suggested awareness and calculation. She kept her movements smooth and calm, carrying the plate without hesitation. The CEO offered a polite nod, a small acknowledgement that passed between them unnoticed by others. She felt a sense of understanding, as if he instinctively recognized that someone was paying attention to the details. Even without knowing it, during this service, she observed a pattern emerge. The CEO's associates seemed unusually coordinated, almost rehearsed in their actions. Each gesture, each movement was synchronized, creating an impression of seamless efficiency. Yet there were moments where human error appeared, a slight hesitation, misplaced hand, or a subtle glance that gave away their awareness of being watched. These imperfections were small, almost invisible to most people, but to her, they revealed the fragile balance between control and vulnerability. She realized that even the most powerful people have weaknesses, and those weaknesses could be observed and understood by someone. Paying close attention, the waitress also began noticing how the CEO handled information. His phone calls were brief and precise, his documents carefully shielded, and his words chosen with care. Yet there were hints of urgency and concern, small signals that something significant was at stake. She wondered what could be so important that a man of such power would take these extraordinary measures to protect it. The curiosity within her grew, but she balanced it with caution. She knew that acting too quickly or revealing her attention could change the dynamic entirely. As the evening wore on, the restaurant grew busier. A mixture of business people, couples, and families filled the tables, creating a lively atmosphere. She continued to serve with a professional smile, all the while observing and analyzing. Each interaction she had with guests provided additional context, helping her understand the subtle differences between ordinary behavior and calculated, deliberate movements. She felt like she was learning a language that only a few people spoke, a language of gestures, glances, and small signals. She found a moment of pause when the CEO leaned back in his chair and checked his watch. It was a small action, but it revealed timing and awareness. He was not just managing the immediate environment. He was anticipating events, planning ahead, and preparing for contingencies. She realized that he was operating on multiple levels simultaneously, balancing strategy, secrecy, and social perception. It was a level of awareness that she admired, yet it also highlighted the weight of responsibility and stress that came with his position. Throughout the evening, she continued to make subtle observations. The way the CEO's associates moved, the interactions with the staff, and the careful handling of information all contributed to a growing understanding. She began to see the bigger picture forming, a narrative of secrecy, strategy, and high stakes. The pieces she had observed over the past 2 nights were coming together, and she felt a sense of clarity and purpose that was both exciting and daunting. During a quiet moment between courses, she found herself reflecting on her own position. She was just a waitress, yet she held knowledge that few others possessed. She understood the responsibility that came with observation and insight. It was not just curiosity. It was an ethical consideration. She had seen the CEO's careful attempts to maintain control, and she also recognized the potential consequences of those secrets remaining hidden or being revealed. Her thoughts were serious, but she remained calm. knowing that patience and precision would be her greatest allies. Later, a small mishap occurred near the CEO's table. A glass tipped over, spilling water across the table. She quickly moved to clean it up, her hands steady, her demeanor calm. The CEO looked up with a brief flicker of surprise, then smiled faintly, acknowledging her presence. It was a moment of human connection, brief and subtle, yet significant. She realized that even in a world of careful strategy and secrecy, small human interactions still mattered. They provided context, insight, and opportunities to understand behavior in a more complete way. As the night progressed, she noticed the CEO reviewing a document with particular intensity. His expression was focused, his movements precise. She could see the tension in his jaw, the slight narrowing of his eyes. It was a reminder that behind the composed exterior, there was pressure, responsibility, and concern. She felt a mix of respect and empathy, recognizing the burden he carried, while still being keenly aware of the secrecy he tried to maintain. Toward the end of the evening, the restaurant began to quiet down, leaving only a few tables occupied. The CEO finished his meal, paid the bill, and prepared to leave. She observed the careful way he gathered his belongings, the polite nods exchanged with the staff, and the precise timing of each movement. Even as he left, the air seemed charged with the remnants of strategy and secrecy. She knew that the story was far from over and that the next steps would likely reveal more about the balance of power, observation, and human insight. Walking back to the staff area, she felt a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. She had learned much that evening, understanding patterns, behavior, and the subtleties of secrecy. She also knew that her observations were becoming more crucial, that the puzzle she had begun to piece together was moving toward a critical moment. The CEO's careful attempts to manage his environment had created an opportunity for her to witness and understand a world that few ever saw. The stage was set, and she was ready to see how the story would unfold in the coming days. As she finished her shift, she paused briefly to reflect. From the first glimpse of the CEO to the careful observations of the evening, she had grown more aware, more perceptive, and more confident in her ability to understand human behavior. She realized that patience, attention to detail, and ethical consideration were her greatest tools. The puzzle was nearly complete, and she felt a quiet determination to continue watching, learning, and preparing for the moment when the hidden story would finally come to light. The narrative of power, secrecy, and courage was still unfolding, and she was at its heart, ready to witness the truth emerge. The restaurant was unusually busy that evening, the clatter of cutlery and hum of conversation creating a lively background. The young waitress moved between tables with ease, her tray balanced and her smile practiced, but her mind was focused on the task she had been silently preparing for over the past few days. She had observed, analyzed, and pieced together the patterns of a powerful man who believed he could keep everything hidden. Tonight, she sensed the moment had come where her attention and courage could intersect with opportunity. The CEO arrived as expected, escorted by his usual team. There was a subtle tension in the air around him, a difference from his usual calm demeanor. She could see the careful calculation in his steps, the way he scanned the room before settling at his favorite table in the corner. His associates moved with precision, positioning themselves to serve as both company and shield. Yet even they seemed aware of the slight change in atmosphere, the unspoken anticipation that permeated the room. It was a delicate balance of power and secrecy, and she was observing it all with an understanding that had grown sharper over the past nights. As she approached the table to take drink orders, she noticed the CEO's brief glance in her direction. There was no recognition, no acknowledgement, but it was enough for her to feel the connection she had sensed before. She jotted down the order carefully, making sure to maintain her professional composure while also reading the subtle cues he and his associates were giving. Each movement, each gesture, each exchanged glance was part of a story that had been unfolding quietly, and she felt ready to witness it reach its turning point. Throughout the evening, she found moments to observe closely without appearing to intrude. She noticed a document briefly exposed on the table, the CEO's hand moving swiftly to conceal it when one of his associates approached. There were quick whispered exchanges that hinted at urgency and concern. Her mind raced as she pieced together the significance of these interactions, understanding that the hidden truths were fragile and potentially explosive if revealed. The restaurant had reached a peak in its evening rush, with laughter, chatter, and clinking glasses filling every corner. It was the perfect backdrop for what was about to happen. The young waitress knew that a public moment could not only reveal secrets, but also create a turning point, shifting the balance between hidden power and visible truth. She watched closely, her heart racing, as the CEO leaned back in his chair, seemingly relaxed but clearly aware of the weight of responsibility pressing on him. Suddenly, a small mishap occurred. A tray from another server wobbled, spilling a few glasses of water near the CEO's table. The young waitress moved quickly, her hands steady as she cleared the mess, keeping the composure that had served her well throughout her shifts. The CEO looked up briefly, a flicker of mild surprise crossing his features, and she felt the momentary human connection that underlined the tension. Even in a world of careful secrecy, small human interactions mattered. Offering insight and opportunity, she realized that the moment was approaching. The CEO's carefully constructed world of control had cracks, subtle openings that only a keen observer could detect. As she moved closer, under the pretext of clearing plates and refilling drinks, she felt the surge of responsibility. The information she had gathered, the patterns she had noticed, and the careful timing of her actions all converged. She knew that exposing even a small part of what she had observed could shift the narrative completely. The pivotal moment came when the CEO, believing himself unnoticed for a brief instant, let slip a phrase about a confidential project. It was a casual comment to his associate, but it carried weight, a hint of information that was meant to be private. The young waitress, positioned nearby, heard it clearly. Her heart raced as she understood the implications. This was the key she had been waiting for. It's a piece that could bring clarity to the puzzle she had been piecing together. Without hesitation, she acted. She approached the table with the calm professionalism that had defined her service. But her voice carried the clarity of observation. She addressed the CEO directly, stating exactly what she had noticed. Her words precise, factual, and without accusation. The restaurant fell silent as patrons turned their attention to the interaction. There was a pause, a moment of disbelief, as the CEO realized that his careful control had been breached in the most unlikely way. The CEO's associates froze, caught off guard by the unexpected revelation. They had relied on secrecy and strategy to maintain an image of control, but the waitress's calm and direct words left no room for ambiguity. The truth was exposed not with aggression, but with clarity and precision. The contrast between the CEO's poised exterior and the reality she had articulated was stark, and the room seemed to hold its breath as the implications sank in. For the first time, the CEO's composed demeanor faltered. His eyes widened slightly, and a flash of vulnerability crossed his face. He had managed power, influence, and secrecy for years, yet here, in the midst of a busy restaurant, an observant young waitress had brought a hidden truth to light. The patrons murmured quietly, sensing the weight of the moment, while staff watched with a mixture of awe and curiosity. The restaurant had transformed into a stage for an unexpected revelation, one that no one had anticipated. Despite the tension, the young waitress remained composed. She had no intention of causing harm, only of conveying what she had observed. Her professionalism, her attention to detail, her courage had converged in a single moment that allowed the truth to surface. She understood that exposure did not have to be confrontational. Clarity and honesty were often more powerful than anger or accusation. The CEO, now fully aware of the situation, had no choice but to acknowledge the revelation. In the aftermath of the revelation, the atmosphere was charged with a mix of surprise, respect, and curiosity. The CEO's associates quickly recalibrated, attempting to regain composure and manage the situation, but the balance of power had shifted. The young waitress, standing quietly yet confidently, had transformed from an observer into an active participant in a narrative that was far larger than herself. The room, once filled with routine interactions and background noise, now hummed with the implications of what had just occurred. The CEO, taking a deep breath, addressed the room with a composed tone, attempting to manage the fallout. His voice carried authority, but there was a subtle acknowledgement of the breach in his carefully maintained control. The patrons, initially silent, began to murmur in quiet speculation. Understanding that they had witnessed something extraordinary, the young waitress, observing reactions and subtle gestures, realized the impact of her actions. She had exposed a secret not through confrontation, through calm observation and decisive clarity. As the evening progressed, the tension gradually shifted. The CEO and his associates continued their discussions, but there was a noticeable change in their demeanor. They were more measured, more aware of the presence of observation, and perhaps more humble in their interactions. The young waitress continued her duties, serving tables and maintaining professionalism, but she carried a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had witnessed and participated in a moment that revealed hidden truths, altering perceptions and demonstrating the power of careful observation. By the time the restaurant quieted down for the night, the young waitress had reflected on the events of the evening. She realized that the balance of power, secrecy, and courage had been tested, and that the outcome demonstrated the importance of awareness and integrity. Her observations, patience, and willingness to act with clarity had transformed a hidden narrative into a visible truth, and the experience left her with a deep sense of understanding about human behavior, responsibility, and the unexpected ways that courage can manifest. As she closed her shift, tidying up and preparing for the next day, she felt a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. The revelation had changed the dynamics she had observed, yet she knew that the story was far from complete. Secrets once exposed could evolve, consequences could emerge, and the interplay of human behavior and power would continue to unfold. She left the restaurant that night with a sense of purpose, aware that her actions had made a difference, and ready to witness how the next chapter of this extraordinary story would develop. The restaurant had quieted down after the dramatic events of the previous night. The usual background noise of clinking dishes and soft chatter was replaced by a calm stillness. The young waitress moved through the dining area with a sense of purpose, reflecting on what had just transpired. She had acted with courage, revealing a truth that had been carefully hidden. And now, she watched as the consequences of that action began to unfold. The CEO had left the restaurant in a noticeably different state than when he had entered. His composure remained intact, but there was a subtle humility in his movements, a recognition that secrecy could only hold for so long. The associates who had accompanied him seemed more reflective, their carefully rehearsed gestures now tempered by awareness of the public eye and the unexpected exposure. The young waitress observed all of this with a calm mind, understanding that the ripples of the revelation extended beyond the walls of the restaurant. Over the next few days, the story began to spread quietly through the business circles. The restaurant staff discussed it in hushed tones, sharing their own impressions and marveling at the courage of the waitress. She remained professional, continuing to serve tables with the same politeness and efficiency as always. But there was a subtle change in how others regarded her. Patrons and colleagues alike began to see her not just as a waitress, but as someone perceptive, confident, and capable of understanding situations that were far beyond ordinary observation. The CEO, meanwhile, faced a private reckoning. The revelation had exposed parts of his professional and personal life that he had tried to keep hidden. He spent hours reflecting on the events, considering the decisions that had led to this exposure and the implications it might have. In his office, he reviewed the situations, the documents, and the interactions that had been observed, realizing that his careful control had been incomplete. For the first time, he acknowledged that even in positions of power, vulnerability was inevitable, and that integrity and transparency had their own weight and value. The young waitress continued her work, yet she also noticed subtle changes in the environment. Patrons seemed to respect her more. Colleagues began to seek her insight on unusual situations, recognizing her sharp perception and level-headed thinking. She realized that her courage had not only affected the CEO, but it also influenced the atmosphere around her, creating a culture of awareness, respect, and integrity within the restaurant. Her actions had demonstrated that, even in ordinary positions, one could wield influence and foster accountability. As the weeks passed, the CEO reached out through intermediaries to express acknowledgement of the events. There was no public confrontation or conflict, but a quiet respect had formed between them. He recognized that the waitress had acted not out of malice or ambition, but out of careful observation and ethical consideration. Her exposure of the hidden truths had allowed him to reflect on his own behavior, to understand the fragility of secrecy, and to begin addressing matters that had long been ignored. The young waitress reflected on her own growth through the experience. She realized that the events had taught her about courage, responsibility, and the importance of observation. She had moved from being an observer to an active participant in a complex human narrative, understanding that small actions, careful attention, and ethical clarity could have significant consequences. The lessons she had learned went beyond the immediate situation and became part of her approach to life, work, and human interactions. The restaurant itself became a quiet center of story and observation. Regular patrons remembered the evening vividly, counting the events in their own words and acknowledging the unique position of the waitress who had revealed the truth. Her colleagues shared her story in admiration, emphasizing how her calm, professionalism, and sharp insight had made the difference. The narrative of courage, careful observation, and ethical action resonated beyond the restaurant, serving as a subtle lesson in integrity and the human ability to effect change even from unexpected positions. The CEO, in his professional circles, began to make adjustments. He approached situations with a newfound awareness of transparency and accountability. The exposure had prompted reflection and action, not resentment or revenge. It was a quiet transformation, but one that mattered. Those around him noticed the shift in tone, the subtle changes in behavior, and the acknowledgement of human fallibility. The young waitress had not only revealed a secret, but she had catalyzed a process of self-reflection and ethical recalibration. For her part, the waitress continued to serve, but she carried with her a sense of accomplishment and purpose. She understood the impact of her actions and recognized the power of quiet courage. Her daily routine of serving meals, clearing tables, and interacting with patrons remained unchanged outwardly, but internally, she had grown. She was no longer just a witness to life's events. She had become a participant, influencing outcomes through careful observation, clarity, and ethical action. Months later, she would recall the evening with a mixture of pride and humility. It had been a turning point, not only for the CEO and his associates, but for herself as well. She had seen the strength of human character, the fragility of secrecy, and the potential for ordinary individuals to influence extraordinary outcomes. The lessons of observation, courage, and ethical clarity had become part of her identity. Guiding her interactions and decisions, the restaurant continued to thrive, filled with the familiar rhythms of service, conversation, and subtle human connection. The story of that night remained a quiet undercurrent, a reminder of the interplay between power, secrecy, and observation. Patrons and staff alike remembered the young waitress, not just for her service, but for the extraordinary courage she had demonstrated. She had exposed a secret, revealed a truth, and in doing so, had reminded everyone present that observation, integrity, and bravery could shift the balance in ways that were both profound and lasting. In the end, the events left an enduring mark. The CEO learned the value of transparency, reflection, and humility. His associates recognized the limits of control and the importance of ethical behavior, and the young waitress understood the strength within herself, the ability to effect change, and the power of observing, understanding, and acting with integrity. The story of exposure and revelation became a quiet legend within the restaurant, a testament to human courage and the subtle, transformative effects of ethical action. As she closed the restaurant each night, she often paused for a moment, looking around the empty tables and the polished floors. The memories of the events, the tension, the observation, and the ultimate revelation lingered in her mind. She realized that life often placed ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, and that the choices one made in those moments could have profound effects. She had acted with integrity and courage, and the world had shifted in subtle but meaningful ways because of it. The experience had become a part of her, shaping her understanding of human nature, responsibility, and the power of ethical action. The young waitress continued her work, living each day with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing that one person, even in an ordinary role, could make a difference. Her story, the story of courage, observation, and revelation, would remain a guiding example of how attention, integrity, and bravery could transform not only moments but lives. The restaurant, once a backdrop for routine service, had become the stage for extraordinary human insight, and she had been at the center of it all, witnessing and shaping the truth in a way that would leave a lasting impression on everyone involved. Months had passed since the young waitress had exposed the CEO's secret, and life at the restaurant had settled into a steady rhythm. Yet, the events of that evening remained fresh in her mind, a turning point that had changed everything. She had grown more confident, more observant, and more aware of the subtle interplay of human behavior. Her colleagues treated her with a quiet respect, and even the regular patrons seemed to notice a difference in her demeanor. She carried herself with an air of calm assurance, knowing that she had acted with integrity and courage when it mattered most. The CEO, on the other hand, had undergone his own transformation. The revelation had forced him to confront the limitations of secrecy and control. In meetings and personal interactions, he displayed a newfound humility, a willingness to listen, and an appreciation for perspectives he might previously have dismissed. He had learned that even powerful individuals could be seen, understood, and influenced by those who were observant and thoughtful. The quiet, steady influence of a single person had reshaped the way he approached decisions and relationships, reminding him that respect and honesty carried more weight than dominance or concealment. The young waitress continued her work with the same dedication as always, but her internal world had expanded. She noticed more, understood more, and was more patient in her approach to life. Every interaction became an opportunity to observe and reflect, to understand not just the actions, but the intentions behind them. She saw that human behavior, while complex and sometimes hidden, was never truly secret from someone willing to pay attention. Her confidence in reading situations had grown, and she felt a quiet sense of empowerment, knowing that insight and integrity could create meaningful change. One evening, the restaurant was quieter than usual. The low hum of conversation and soft music created an intimate atmosphere. The young waitress moved from table to table, serving meals and refilling drinks, all while keeping her senses attuned to the environment around her. She noticed subtle gestures, a nervous laugh, a fleeting glance, a hand fidgeting with a napkin. Each detail told a story, revealing emotions and thoughts that were not spoken aloud. She had learned that attention to detail, combined with empathy and careful judgment, allowed her to understand the world in ways that others often missed. A couple of new patrons arrived, and she guided them to their table with a warm smile. While taking their orders, she noticed a small tension between them, a hesitation in their voices that suggested unspoken concerns. She offered gentle conversation, allowing them to relax without probing too deeply. Through these interactions, she realized that her ability to observe and respond thoughtfully had become a subtle form of influence. People felt seen and understood, not judged or exposed, and that created a quiet trust that enriched her work and relationships. As the evening progressed, she glanced toward the corner table where the CEO often sat when he visited. He was there again, reviewing documents and speaking quietly with an associate. She watched from a distance, noting the calm professionalism in his posture, the measured movements of his hands and the thoughtful pauses in his speech. He seemed different, now less guarded, more reflective, and more aware of the presence of others. The experiences of the past months had shaped him, and she could sense the subtle growth that had taken place. It was a quiet reminder that change often comes from unexpected sources, and that insight, observation, and courage could influence even those who seemed untouchable. A small incident occurred at another table. A child spilled a glass of juice, and the young waitress moved swiftly to clean it up. The parents looked relieved and thanked her, But she noticed more than just the surface gratitude. There was a subtle tension, a concern about how the child's action might be perceived by others in the restaurant. She handled the situation with care, offering reassurance and maintaining composure. Moments like these reminded her that human behavior was full of nuance, and that empathy and patience often revealed more than words ever could. Throughout the night, she continued to observe, learning from the small, seemingly mundane interactions around her. She noticed the way people carried themselves, the micro-expressions that revealed feelings, and the subtle ways in which people communicated beyond language. Each observation deepened her understanding of human nature, reinforcing the lessons she had learned. From her pivotal experience with the CEO, she recognized that life was a series of interactions, carrying the potential for insight, growth, and meaningful connection. Later, during a quiet moment, she reflected on the journey she had undergone. From that first evening when she had noticed the CEO's subtle cues, to the night of the revelation and the months that followed, she had grown in awareness, confidence, and ethical clarity. She understood the delicate balance of power and observation. It's a responsibility that comes with knowledge, and the subtle ways in which one person could influence the behavior and perspectives of others. Her reflection brought a sense of calm satisfaction, a recognition of the quiet strength she had discovered within herself. The CEO, too, had learned from the experience. He had adjusted his approach to leadership and personal interaction, becoming more transparent, more reflective, more considerate of the perspectives of those around him.